How long after you give birth should you take off before going back to work? And do we need federally mandated maternity leave in this country in order for women to have a healthy postpartum period? We're going to look at a very viral tweet today where a woman tells her experience about going back to work 2 weeks postpartum, and we'll discuss a little bit about how this is reflective of how our culture approaches birth and postpartum, and then of course discuss whether federally mandated maternity leave is necessary. We discussed this a few weeks ago, at this point probably a couple months ago, but it's worth bringing it up again. And then after that, we're going to do an AMA. I have collected some really good questions. I posted a question box on my Instagram stories a few days ago. I was pleasantly surprised with the quality of questions that we got. So we're going to do an AMA after that. Welcome to The Shift with Gina. This is a show where we talk about women's cultural issues, especially relating to women's health, building healthy, strong women for stronger families and a thriving society. And if you're new here, I'm glad you're here. Welcome. So let's take a look at this tweet. This is from a woman named Alicia Andrzejewski. I don't know how to say her last name. She's a PhD. She has the PhD at the end of her name. And this is what she says. 2 weeks postpartum, I put on dress pants and a fresh, supersized pad between my legs, leaving my baby to go to an academic job interview. I sat in a department chair's office, bleeding in a blazer, poised and eloquent. I got the job. We, postpartum bodies in the U.S., are exhausted. And then she went on to say, I was unsure about how I was going to fund the next year of my PhD. I talk about this and more about postpartum care in this article on the Winter's Tale. And then she also attached a different tweet from the day before that said, here's the thing, I can post all day about my negative experiences pregnant and postpartum, but I never lose sight of my privilege as an educated white woman. Black pregnant people and mothers have to contend with so much more, namely making it through alive. Which, side note, this is going to be a sidebar here. But you know how you hear all the time, liberals and progressives are always talking about how dangerous pregnancy is for Black women. They say that more Black women die in pregnancy than any other demographic. Have you ever looked into the statistics? This has been busted a few times. This myth has been busted a few times by various content creators and experts come forward to actually take a deeper dive into the statistics. You know why the rates of mortality are so high amongst pregnant Black women? Because they count homicide as a maternal death. So in these statistics, this is the classic example of how they lie with statistics. I think there's a whole book of called How to Lie with Statistics. This is probably the number one example of how it's done. They make you believe that Black women die in droves when they're pregnant because of some kind of racist thing happening in the medical system or in our culture, that we just want Black pregnant women dead. That's what they want you to believe. The truth is, the homicide rates are just thrown into these statistics. So when we're talking about maternal deaths during pregnancy and I think maybe even postpartum, but definitely during pregnancy, they're including all the homicides. And unfortunately, there are more homicides that take the lives of Black women versus I think any other race. I think that's true. You have to fact check me on that one. But just the fact that they're counting homicides in there. So they want you to believe that, oh, if you're a Black woman, you're so much more likely to die just because you're Black. No, it's because you throw the homicide rates in there and you have these usually men that are killing the women when they're pregnant. And a lot of those statistics, of course, come from inner cities where women are victims of violence. They're victims of shootings. And so when they're pregnant, it gets counted as this maternal death. That now this woman is saying Black pregnant people. You can say women, by the way. Can we stop with the pregnant people thing? A pregnant person is a woman. Okay. Black pregnant mothers have to contend with so much more, namely making it through alive. Did you know that most diaper companies donate money to abortion funds and support abortion campaigns? That's why I'm so proud to partner with Every Life Diapers. This pro-life company is openly supportive of mothers, children, families, and the right to life. And they have a wonderful product. Both of my kids use these diapers. Not only are they easy to use and they're comfortable, but they're leak-free, so you don't have to worry about those messes in the middle of the night. I have never had a blowout mess since using Every Life Diaper with my newborn baby, which is very, very rare. I love the product, and I also, of course, love supporting every life in their mission. It is so rare today to find a company that is openly pro-life and openly supportive of mothers and families. So that's why I'm so proud to be supporting every life, and you can support them too while also getting a fantastic product. Use my code 10GINA for 10% off of your first order with every life. And even if you're not a mom and if you don't have kids that are in diapers, it makes a great gift. So if you know a mom who's about to have her first child, or you know families that have multiple kids who are in diapers, this makes a fantastic gift. So use my code 10GINA at checkout and support this amazing company that has an amazing product. Anyway, so let's discuss what's happening here. This is an academic woman. I don't know if she's married. I don't know anything about her. We can kind of click on her profile and take a look. She's an assistant professor of Shakespeare, SUNY alum. She's a writer. I don't know anything else about her. Her whole profile is about her work, so we don't know if she's married. There was obviously some man in the picture. She went to a job interview 2 weeks postpartum. I don't know if this was her first child, judging by the way that this is worded. I think this is her first child. I don't know, any moms out there listening? I know most of my audience are women, and I'm sure that there's a good number of women who are mothers that listen to my show. I am 9 weeks postpartum now, and with my postpartum phases, both of them, I could not imagine going to a job interview 2 weeks postpartum. Not because I couldn't walk around and not because I was bedridden, but because your focus is 100% on this brand new baby that you just brought into the world. And it's normal, very normal, to still be bleeding 2 weeks postpartum, especially with your first child. With my first, I bled for, I think it was 6 weeks. And then with the second one, it was 3 weeks, and then I was done. And that's pretty typical. Every birth that you have after your first, the recovery is going to be much easier. You bleed for a shorter period of time. But this woman goes to a job interview 2 weeks postpartum, puts on her brave face, bleeding in a blazer, poised and eloquent. I got the job. Now, she used this experience to complain about the fact that there's no federally mandated maternity leave. There's no federally funded childcare. And she uses this experience to blame our society and blame the government that we don't do a good enough job supporting mothers, especially in their postpartum phase. I don't even know where to start when we start to unpack this, but the first thing that comes to mind is it is not the government's job to make motherhood easier for you. It's not the government's job to pay for someone to look after your kids. It's not the government's job to pay for you to stay home with your child while you're on leave from work. It's not the government's job to do that. The government is absolutely meant to promote the good. And I've said many times previously on episodes that I think the government does a lousy job at supporting families and moms. But I'm not talking about the kind of support that comes through federal funding. I think the government can do a much better job, at the very least, by providing tax breaks for families. I used this example before. Poland, if you have 4 children or more under a certain age in Poland, you don't pay income tax because they're a country that really, really wants to see more families. They incentivize families to grow and to have more children. They want to see more children born into society. And that's not what we want here in America. I mean, if anything, we were trying to lower the birth rate, and it's very successful. Our birth rate is below replacement rate right now. And so it's not the government's job to just pay for you to stay home with your baby. I don't know if she has a husband, but it's clear that she is planning and has already sort of pawned off her child to be taken care of by somebody else in this very vulnerable time. And when I read this tweet, the very first thing that came to my mind was the child. She's here complaining about the fact that she's exhausted and she's bleeding when she has to go to a job interview. And it's meant to elicit emotions and sympathy for her. It is so selfish and narcissistic to me that you want people to feel bad for you when you have left your 2-week-old little tiny baby that's probably still just 7 pounds, this little tiny child, in the second week of their life to go get a job interview and presumably go back to work very, very soon. I think about the health and the well-being of the child. This is what really makes me mad. Whenever we have these conversations, these mothers complain about how hard it is for them. It reminds me a little bit of the surrogacy conversation when we talked about Khloe Kardashian and how it went viral. She was saying it felt transactional to essentially purchase her son. Even though they were biologically related, she felt a total disconnect from the child. And everyone was like, oh, I'm so sorry, Khloe. I feel so bad for you. Oh, well, poor Khloe. Lance Bass, gay guy from NSYNC, said the same thing. He had no connection with his twins in the first year of their life. They wanted to see his mom. And everyone was like, oh, poor Lance. I'm sorry about that. Is that hard for you? Okay, if it's that hard for you, how hard do you think it is for the babies? How hard do you think it is for the newborns, for the infants who don't have their mommies that they are supposed to have, especially second week of life? Like every single minute of that child's life this early on should be with mommy for however many benefits we can get into. Obviously, even down to just simply being fed on demand, being breastfed on demand. At that age is so important. Skin to skin contact, developing that emotional attachment, that secure attachment from a very young age. A child can have their cries and their nervousness regulated by just sheer proximity to their mother. And that's what I think of. And so when we talk about these conversations of federally mandated maternity leave, giving women the opportunity to go back to work, we can talk about that, but I actually think that's secondary to the child's health. We never hear about the well-being of the child in these conversations because everyone is so selfish and so self-obsessed with themselves and their careers that they're not even thinking about the implications this has on the child's health and how it's going to affect the child's growth as they get older. We always talk about the importance of a mother being there for her child under the age of 3, especially. Of course, it's important for moms to be there for their kids at all ages when they're kids beyond 3 years old. But there's something very, very important about being present for your kids under the age of 3. It has a lot to do with their secure attachment. It's going to really shape them on how they approach things emotionally, how they handle stress in their child, adolescent, and adult years. I recommend the book Being There by Erica Komisar. It was, like I've said before in my podcast, it was the book that inspired me to quit my job when my child was born. My first was born because I knew I couldn't do it. I always had a feeling. I always had this tug in my heart. It was inexplicable. I couldn't explain exactly what it was or articulate it, but I always felt as I was getting closer to my due date, I was like, I don't think I'm going to want to work after she's born. And when I first got pregnant, I thought I was going to be a working mom. That's what I wanted because I loved my career. I was devoted to my career. I had a great job. I had like a dream job and I didn't want to leave it. But then as I got closer and closer to giving birth, it became clear to me that something didn't feel right about me leaving her with somebody else to be raised. And then I read that book, Being There. It was the only book I read during my pregnancy. People say, read the baby books, and they recommend all these baby books. I intentionally avoided all the baby books because most of them are just dumb. And a lot of them have antiquated, archaic advice, and they kind of fearmonger women, and they all say different things. I got more advice and guidance from my mom and from other women who have been mothers for a long time. Anyway, that book was really the turning point for me. And I would recommend it to any woman who's interested to learn exactly how your presence affects your child's health in the first 3 years of their life. So this woman, Alicia, I do feel bad for you that you had to pick yourself up 2 weeks postpartum, or you felt like you had to, and go to a job interview. That sounds horrible, but I'm a little bit more concerned about your child. That's what I'm more concerned about. And it's sad because when we hear stories like this, of course, you have to talk about the fact that feminism, from the very, very first day of feminism, from the first wave, it meant to tear down the family order, tear down how we see men's roles and women's roles. And it meant to replace women's sacred duty and fulfillment with motherhood and raising their children, replace that with an obsession with climbing the corporate ladder, with going into the workforce, devoting all the time and energy that you have into your job. And then we end up here, where women have been programmed for all of their life to put all of their attention and energy and effort into their job. And then when they have their first child, they're encouraged to do whatever they can to make sure that the child is cared for so they can go back and focus on their job. And then they act like the victims because they're like, men don't have this pressure. Men don't have to worry about who's taking care of the kids. They get to just go back to work. And I hear this stuff. I'm like, yeah, duh. Of course they get to just go back to work, because you guys made the grave mistake a long time ago to pretend like men and women are the same. This is all predicated on this foundational idea that men and women are interchangeable. Because once they are, then it doesn't matter who goes to work, who stays home, who stays with the kids, who doesn't, because they're the same. Men can do women's jobs and women can do men's jobs. So you have made the grave mistake of believing that you can do whatever a man does, even if you're a mom. It doesn't matter who takes care of the kid. The man should stay home and take care of the kid. And it all comes from however many waves of feminism we're at now. Every wave of feminism has always attempted to do this very thing, where we break down the sacred roles of women and men, we make them interchangeable, and we break down the family unit. And of course, this brings us to the question, should there be federally mandated maternity leave so that women can go back to work? And whenever I have this discussion online about the importance of women being there for their kids, I say women should raise their young children. Yes, that doesn't mean that you can't have any hobbies, or you can't have any professional dreams, or you can't work a little bit from home and kind of keep up some of your passions professionally. But it's important for these early years, these early weeks especially, to be there for your kids, for your young child. And I'm always met with the same question of, well, why do you think that the government shouldn't demand maternity leave from companies then? Because it would be so much easier. If you really want women to raise their kids, we need maternity leave. And my response is always like, how does that solve anything? What are you going to get? You're going to get a year maternity leave. Okay, you're going to get 1 year off. The government's going to pay for that, or they're going to demand that the company pays for that. Even if you have 1 year off, that's just 1 year out of your child's life. That doesn't mean that you get to raise your kid. It just means that you have 1 year off instead of 2 months off, which it's a difference. But in your child's life, in the grand scheme of your child's life, especially in their adolescent, a year is not a long time. You got to go back to work. So I don't think that federally mandated maternity leave solves that issue of mothers being home with their kids. It doesn't. It just slaps on a temporary Band-Aid. It drains companies of resources. And if people want the government to pay for it, which many of them do, because there are countries out there, I believe Germany is an example, France too. There are plenty of countries out there where Americans point to and they're like, see, they have federally mandated maternity leave. The government will they'll subsidize a lot of the maternity leave. So then you're draining resources from the government. Our tax dollars are going to raise somebody else's kids. And then even after that, the woman's got to go back to work anyway. So like, what's the point? So I don't think maternity leave solves this issue. I'm not saying that companies should never offer it, but I don't think it's useful for the government to mandate a certain number of weeks for every single company in the country to provide that. And like we talked about before, you've got a big difference of economy between the state of California and the state of, for example, Kentucky. You think that a small business in Kentucky, a small mom and pop store, you think that they would be able to pay a year-long maternity leave to their female employees the same way that Google can? No, what's going to happen is you're going to have a lot of these small companies end up not hiring women because they can't afford this luxurious maternity leave that the federal government demands. It's impossible to demand the same thing from all these 50 different states, from all of these different companies, and just force them to provide funding for their female employees to take off a few months or several months to be home with their kids. And then you have to keep that job for them, and you have to pay someone else to do that job. So you're paying two salaries, basically. You're paying the woman's maternity leave, and you're paying someone else to do that job. And then you got to bring the woman back into work and keep paying her. It's just not, I understand that we see other countries do this, but these are the countries that have like the same population as Los Angeles. Of course, size matters. We are a very large country, 340 million people, 50 different states. Every state has its own unique little economy, different from the next. It's not practical, number one. And number two, it doesn't even solve the issue of mothers raising their own children, like I said. And notice this kind of language just really pisses me off. She says in the tweet, "We, postpartum bodies in the US, are so exhausted." What is it with this bodies language? Have you ever noticed that? When any of these progressives, they talk about Black bodies are endangered, postpartum bodies are exhausted. They keep using the term bodies. It's like this sanitized, woke, progressive academic language. And whenever I was in graduate school, I went to Harvard and I got a Master of Theological Studies. It was a very, very woke program. It was like the social sciences more than anything else. In 2011, I knew a they, them before the gender pronoun stuff even got popular. 2011, it was normal to have like a they, them on campus. And of course, in the academic text that we would read, I would also see the same language. Postpartum bodies, female bodies, Black bodies, indigenous bodies. I don't know exactly where it comes from, but it really annoys me. It's like this, the way it's this victimized language. And one of the reasons they use this language is because they don't want to use gendered language because it's considered offensive. They don't want to say women. They don't want to say men. They don't want to say postpartum women. Why? Because remember, guys, men can get pregnant and have kids too. So this is why they don't say pregnant women anymore. They say pregnant people or pregnant bodies. It's so stupid. Ladies, did you know that if you have a menstrual cycle, you should be taking a prenatal multivitamin every day? Not only if you're trying to get pregnant or if you're pregnant or nursing. The prenatal multivitamin is great for women in their childbearing years, regardless of your pregnancy plan. So if you have a menstrual cycle, you should be taking a prenatal multivitamin every day. There are so many nutrients in here that are important for healthy hormones, a healthy menstrual cycle, a period that's much more manageable. It'll help reduce your menstrual cramps and PMS symptoms. And there's so many things in here that your body needs if you still have a menstrual cycle. And it's especially important to find a prenatal that has folate instead of folic acid. And it's actually kind of hard to find. There's so many prenatals out there that use folic acid, which is the synthetic form of folate that's not bioavailable to the body. So I highly recommend the First Form prenatal multivitamin. I've been taking this for 5 years, long before my first pregnancy. And it's a fantastic product. It gives you so much energy in the morning. It really helps to regulate your mood and your menstrual cycle. So I highly recommend it. Please use my affiliate link in the description in the show notes. Just click on that, make your first purchase. This company is also fantastic. They're very pro-America and patriotic, so it's a win-win. You know you're supporting a company that has the same values as you, and they have excellent customer service. So if you need to make a return, it's 100% money, 110% money back guarantee. And let me know if you guys have any questions about the products. It's so stupid. Remember that scene in Mean Girls where Regina says to, what's her name, to Gretchen? Gretchen's like, oh no, to Karen. Karen's like, do you want to go to Taco Bell? And Regina's like, I can't go to Taco Bell, Karen. I'm on an all carb diet. God, Karen, you are so stupid. And that's the voice that I hear in my head when I see this language, postpartum bodies, indigenous bodies. God, Karen, you are so stupid. It's so dumb. Just say women and say men. I'm over it. I don't even know if there's anything else I wanted to say on this topic, but I'm sorry. I don't think it's healthy for women to be going back to work 2 weeks postpartum. And I understand that there are some situations, sadly, where there is no choice at all. God forbid, maybe there was a tragedy in the family. The father's not there to provide anymore. The mother has to feed the kids. I'm obviously not talking about these situations. I'm talking about the situations of women who are just career obsessed and they have a kid and they just pawn the kid off to somebody else and they go back to work 2 weeks postpartum. Your body's not even fully healed yet. And even aside from that, like we said at the very beginning, let's talk about the health of your child. It's not healthy to do this. And it makes me sad that we've built this society where this is totally and completely normalized. It should not be normalized. We should feel sick to our stomachs that we have created a culture that makes this normal and that we have created a culture that shits on women who say, hey, maybe this isn't so good for us. Because anybody who dares to say, this isn't healthy for women and babies, we're the ones who get attacked. We're the ones who are called bigots. We're the ones who are called, I don't know, whatever names you want to call us. And they call us, the stupid trad wives that want to take away women's rights. No, we don't. We just want you to be healthy. We want your children to be well cared for, because the way that you care for your children, believe it or not, has a massive impact on the rest of our culture and society. I want all children to be cared for well in a healthy way, not just mine. And this is the thing where people are like, what do you care what people do with their bodies and with their families? You know why I care? Because I care about the state of our society. I want my kids to grow up in a healthy, thriving society with moral people and with a society that generally has moral values and that embraces and supports the family unit. And the more children we have who are pawned off to be raised by strangers, the worse our future is going to look. And you can disagree with me all you want, but that's just how it is. That's how it is. I don't care how much academic language you put on it, and you try to show me studies and science that says the kids are totally fine when they're raised by strangers and go to daycare 24/7. No, I think it's setting up the future to be bleak. It's setting up a future generation that we don't want to see. So I do care how other kids are being raised. And I'm not saying that we should punish or lock up these women that are career obsessed and not raising their own children. I'm just saying that it's our culture has created it to where this is normal, and our culture degrades and demeans women who dare to speak against it. And that's what really makes me sad, is that our culture is so broken and it's so rotten that this is normalized. Let's get into some AMAs, some questions. We got some good ones. I have to admit that whenever I put a question box on my Instagram, I'm not expecting much. I'm a little bit skeptical of the quality of questions that I'm going to get, because a lot of times people send me the dumbest stuff. They literally send me a thing that says thoughts on postpartum workouts. That's all they say. Thoughts on X, just thoughts. And I'm like, I don't know what that means, but we got some really good questions here. So let's get into it. Okay. What do you think America can do to realign ourselves morally, or do you think it's too late? This is from Knox Gibson. This is a great question. I don't ever think it's too late. I don't ever think it's too late, because I'm a Christian and I believe that God is sovereign. And I know as a Christian that the battle has already been won between good and evil. That doesn't mean that things are always going to be great and perfect here, but I always think there is a way to realign ourselves morally. And the way that we do that is not going to be through politics or legislation. I think it's going to be through bolstering the family unit first and foremost. And I think that the more families that are stronger and that are involved in church life, that is going to make a very strong ripple effect on their communities and eventually our society and our culture. Because the way to realign ourselves morally really comes down to culture. It doesn't really matter at the end of the day who is in office, who is the president, because I think it was the very last episode I reminded you guys that politics is downstream from culture, but culture is downstream from what? Religion. So it goes religion, culture, politics. That's the order of things. So that's when you look at the state of any society, that's the order of things and how things got messed up. And I think first we have to change the culture. And of course, the culture is downstream from religion. So, and I also believe that religion and the family unit, that's really where it goes hand in hand too. So if we want a stronger culture, we need better families, and we need families that are rooted in church life. So we need more people to prioritize marriage and children, and we need them to prioritize that within the Christian realm. That's what we need. And that's going to be the only thing to save us, because from there, we're going to slowly see these degenerate things in our culture die out, because you're not going to have as many people consuming them. The reason why we have all these degenerate celebrities and music and TV and movies, which have a massive impact on the way that people live their lives, the way that people view things, and the way that people, yes, vote. So when we have all of these things making such a big impact, the reason we do is because people are consuming this stuff. They're choosing to consume it. They want to consume it because their brains are rotten and because they don't have any moral compass of their own. But if we have more and more people who are living Christian lives, who are raised by good parents, they're going to reject that degeneracy. You're not going to be able to sell that stuff anymore. And then it's slowly going to die out. That's the first and foremost, the way that we can realign ourselves morally. And it's going to take a while. It's not going to happen overnight. I don't even think it's going to happen over one generation. I think it's going to happen over a couple of generations. And people often feel helpless. They're like, well, what can I do? I can't do anything to change it. Yes, you can. The way that we raise our kids today, the way that we function within our family makes a huge impact on what our future is going to look like. Don't ever underestimate the power that you have within your own family, because your family has a massive impact on its community, which eventually has a massive impact on society. So start with yourself. Go to church. Go to church. And if you're not married yet, just be very intentional about who you choose to marry. Marry someone who is aligned with your values, commit yourself to the marriage, and raise strong moral children with Christian values. That's how we do it. Number 2 here from Cassie Lang. How has the transition from 1 child to 2 been? This is a question I got asked 2 or 3 times here. Someone else asked, how's life with 2 kids now? I was so tired with 1. Does 2 just become more natural? And yes, 2 just does become more natural. 2 is much easier than being pregnant with 1. That's what I'll say first and foremost. When I was pregnant with my second and I had my toddler, I thought I was going to jump off a cliff. It was so freaking hard. It was so hard. And let me tell you, ladies, that it is so much easier to have a newborn and a toddler than it is to be pregnant with a toddler. So much easier. 2 kids has been really phenomenal. My heart has burst with so much more love than I ever thought I could have. You don't double your love. It triples, quadruples. You could like times your love by 100, because it's not just this new baby you have. You also see your new baby with their older sibling. You see your new baby with your husband. You see your new baby with other family members and other friends. There's just so many more little connections that you see your love burst into. And I just have so much more love than I did before. And I think that multiplies with every child and multiplies with every stage that you see your children go through. And I love it. If we could afford it, I'd have 10 kids. It's just, it's just too hard to have that many kids. But I absolutely love it. And I will say that one thing I didn't expect, it's not really a good thing, but one thing I didn't expect is I have much more anxiety this postpartum than I had with the first, because now you have a second child to care for. Because when you have a first child to care for, you can constantly have your mind on one child, your attention on one child. But then when you have a second, you have to split your attention and your care and your concern. So now I have another child that I have to like constantly worry about. I'm naturally a worrier anyway. And I'm just always worried about the 2 of them now. And I have to constantly make room for the both of them in my mind. And it's made me a little bit more anxious than the first, but it's okay. It's not something that is totally dreadful. That's just a reflection of how much more love I have for not only my son, but for both of my kids. And I will say 2 feels a lot more natural. And when it's your second, you are so much less worried about the newborn phase. Like the newborn phase feels so easy compared to the first, because you've been there before. It's so easy. And a friend of mine just had their first child 3 or 4 days ago. And they were texting me and they were like, oh my gosh, how do we figure out how to sleep? I don't want to put her in the bassinet because I just don't want to leave her there by herself. And I remember having all of these concerns and worries, but now with the second newborn I have, it's just like so much easier. It's just breezy because you've been there, you know what to expect. So I love it. I love having the second. I think it's been incredible. Another thing to really prepare yourself for, though, is you have even less time with your husband. You have to really be intentional about making time with your husband. My husband and I have not been alone other than the kids are asleep and we're like finally getting to catch up. But it's a lot harder, I think, to really find some quality time with your husband. You have to be intentional about it. And I do understand why parents end up separating after having multiple kids, because if you don't tend your marriage and if you don't feed it and if you don't approach it intentionally, it can easily crumble and fall apart. So don't let your marriage just fall to the wayside when you start having more kids, because it can very easily just crumble. Let's go to another one. Panda Plums, please talk about natural family planning. Thank you. So natural family planning is preventing pregnancy or trying to get pregnant when you want without any medical intervention, without any synthetic hormones, without any medication. And the birth control pill, any form of hormonal birth control, is more popular than ever today. And most women take it to prevent pregnancy. But sadly, we've seen many more women come forward in recent years to talk about how devastating birth control has been on their health and their life. If you've watched my show before, you know I'm one of them. I nearly died from hormonal birth control when I was 19 years old. And from that point on, every one of my pregnancies is considered a high-risk pregnancy because once you have blood clots once, you're very, very likely to have them again, and particularly during pregnancy. So I think it's a good thing that many women are coming forward to talk about the realities of the pill and birth control because it's wrecking women's minds, their mental health, their gut health, their fertility for the future. So natural family planning is becoming more popular. A little bit, I wouldn't say popular yet, but it's more on our radars, and it gets a really bad rap. Whenever I talk about natural family planning or ovulation tracking, there are always the trolls, the women in my mentions who love feminism and abortion and body positivity. And they're like, yeah, that's a surefire way to have 10 kids accidentally. Like you can't play Russian roulette and just like guess when you're going to get pregnant. And these women have no idea how their menstrual cycle works. I guarantee you, if I plucked a random girl off of a college campus, or if I plucked a random 25-year-old female and I asked them, tell me how your menstrual cycle works and what days of the month you can get pregnant, they would not be able to tell me a damn thing. And that's because women were never taught about their cycles. And that's because the conventional medical system doesn't want you to know about your menstrual cycle and how your hormones work. Most doctors, you know what they're taught in medical school? They're taught that you can get pregnant on any day you're not menstruating. Yeah, that's what they're taught. And that's what they teach their patients. Why? Because they want to shove the birth control pill down your throat so they can make more money and keep you a lifelong patient of pharmaceuticals. That's what they want. But newsflash, you can only get pregnant 3 to 5 days a month, maybe. Sperm lives in the body for up to like 7 days, they say, so you have to take that into account. But you can only get pregnant a couple of days a month when you are ovulating. And once you understand your menstrual cycle, which is the first step to natural family planning, you have to understand when you menstruate, when you ovulate, how to understand the signs of ovulation. And if you don't know any of this, that's okay, because there are lots of resources out there. In the month of August, I'm doing a healthy hormone challenge. And during the whole month, for those of you who sign up, it's only $1 a day for 30 days. You get webinars throughout the month. So I'm doing like 4 or 5 webinars. I'm releasing them to you. And one of them is ovulation tracking. So I explain to you how to understand your menstrual cycle, how to know when you're ovulating, because it's a combination of, number one, your cervical mucus, which is considered the gold standard of ovulation. You have to check your cervical mucus. It's going to do different things. It goes from the more mucousy, and then it goes to like the egg white consistency, things like that. And then you can use other biomarkers to track your ovulation, like your BBT, your basal body temperature. You can use LH strips to find when your LH, that hormone, surges. There's a lot of different things that you can use. So whenever we talk about natural family planning, it's not pulling out. It's not the pull-out method. It's not, I think it's called the rhythm method. It's not any of that. It's understanding what your menstrual cycle is doing. Because once you know your menstrual cycle, you know exactly when you're ovulating. And there are plenty of apps out there that are good to use. So that's the biggest thing to understand, is that it's not about taking chances. It's not about Russian roulette. It's about understanding your natural hormonal cycle. And when you track your cycle, you also learn a lot more about your own health, because you might notice there are some things that are off, and tracking your cycle allows you to learn a lot more of these things and to bring questions to doctors or practitioners. So let's see what else I can say about natural family planning. And for those of you who still want to use a form of birth control like a condom, maybe on the days where you're ovulating, that's another way you can combine that with natural family planning. And then, of course, the other side of natural family planning is if you want to get pregnant, you'll know exactly when you're ovulating. You'll know when to make it happen. But I will say for natural family planning, I highly recommend that you download a webinar or take a class or something online. It's really easy. It doesn't take long, but you just have to learn a little bit. It's not something that you can just read online really quick and then just implement it. You have to learn. And it takes a couple of months as a woman to understand your cycle if you're not familiar with it right now. But it's so worth it. It's worth a little bit of legwork in the beginning, because once you get it down, you just get your cycle after that. And it helps so much to understand your body and to naturally prevent pregnancy without relying on synthetic hormones that are going to wreck your natural hormones, give you mental health issues, wreck your gut lining, ruin your sleep, your sex drive, etc. I could go on and on and on. Okay. Be Colorful 02 says, what's one of the funniest things your daughter has done with you or dad? This happened recently. I'll tell you the one that sticks out most recently is my daughter's 2.5, and she is at that stage where she can repeat anything that adults say. So, we have to be extra careful what we say around her, because even if you're not in the same room as her and she hears you say something like in the other room, she'll repeat it. And we did not even realize that she heard my husband say this. There was one night where he came home from work and my daughter was being particularly precocious. I think she hadn't napped that day. When my daughter doesn't nap, she takes one nap a day. When she doesn't nap, she turns into a little bit of a monster in the evening because she's so exhausted, and it can be tough to handle. And my husband was trying to ask her to do something because I had to go feed the baby or something. And it was getting frustrated, and he looked at me and he just said to me, he goes, everything's a battle with her. He says, everything's a battle. I said, I know it's frustrating. I was like, we're going to get through tonight. It's going to be fine. And that's something that my husband tends to say when things get a little bit tough. He's like, everything's a battle. He'll say that too sometimes when like it seems like everything's going wrong in life. We look at each other, we're like, everything's a battle. But we didn't think that she heard that. So it's just so funny. Like a week or two ago, I'm home with the kids. My husband's at work, and I asked my daughter to like go put on a pair of shoes or something. And I forgot what the exact context was, but I said, honey, you need to go do this now, please. And she turned around and she walked away from me, and she throws her hands in the air. She goes, everything is a battle, she says, walking away. And I said, what'd you say, honey? I said, what did you say? She turned around, she looked at me, she said, everything is a battle. And she dramatically sighs and throws her hands in the air, which is like, I think she was combining what daddy said with how mommy acts sometimes, because I gesture a lot with my hands, and I sigh a lot, and sometimes she picks it up for me. And it was just one of the funniest things ever. I was nearly in tears. I was laughing so hard, and I wish my husband were there in the moment because he would have died. He came home from work that day, and I told him what happened, and he started laughing even just from the secondhand story. It was so funny. And I don't know if anybody else is going to find that funny, because when your kids do something that's hilarious in the moment and you tell the story after and people are like, haha, good one. But that was one of the funniest moments I've ever seen from my daughter. She's a little comedian these days. That new Jen says, what can female student athletes do to decrease cortisol levels on a daily basis? Well, first of all, we have to make sure that your cortisol levels are normal. So if you are concerned about your cortisol levels, especially as an athlete, the first thing that you want to do is take that saliva cortisol test that doctors will order a lab for. And it's basically, they give you all these vials and you have to like spit. It's kind of gross, but it's fine. You spit into these vials when you first wake up, mid-morning, lunch. I forgot how many. I think they collect like 5 vials. I did it couple years ago when I was getting some testing done, and that tests your cortisol levels to see if your cortisol levels are normal. Cortisol should be highest in the morning. It tapers off, of course, is lowest at night. That's what it should be. But many people who have dysfunctional hormones, their cortisol will rise at night, and that is a recipe for terrible sleep and mood swings, etc. So if you have a hunch that your cortisol levels are out of whack, the very first thing you need to do is get them tested. And then after that, it's tough. If you're an athlete, like a real athlete, that's really tough as a female, because I don't have a great answer for how you can decrease cortisol as a student athlete, because the nature of being an athlete means that your body is going to be in a stressful situation a lot of the time. And unfortunately, men are equipped to handle that better than women are. So I wish I had a better answer for you, but I would just go get some testing done. And I don't know how important it is for you to be an athlete, but if it's really affecting your hormones, which will one day affect your fertility, maybe consider an alternative. Sorry. Come join the best women's health experience online today. My women's health group called The Shift is a wonderful online community of hundreds of women who are dedicated to improving their health and their wellness. In my group, you get access to so many different things that are going to help you improve your health, whether you want to lose weight, balance your hormones, improve your fertility, whatever it might be. Every month, we do a different health challenge in my group. Sometimes we do fitness challenges. Sometimes we do meal prep challenges. Sometimes we do challenges for balancing your hormones. And there's always something new to work on. So we're constantly moving forward together. I also offer recipes and weekly workouts in the group. And there's so many webinars and interviews and exclusive podcast episodes with guests where we can talk about an array of topics that aren't really allowed to be talked about online, like on YouTube. I've got interviews with holistic OBGYNs, holistic practitioners, frequency medicine doctors, nutritionists, doulas, everything that you might be looking for. And of course, we talk about health from a holistic perspective. We talk about marriage, motherhood, and we're able to share a lot more information in there that we might not necessarily be able to share online on YouTube. So go to the link in the description in the show notes and join The Shift, my women's health group. It's at a really affordable price. We've got so much going on there, and I have additional programs and weight loss programs in there if you're looking for something additional. So join us. We've got hundreds of supportive women who are on the same path to improve their health and their lifestyle, and we'll see you inside The Shift. Julie Pekeski says, what's your advice on exercise and maintaining breastfeeding 3 months postpartum? I actually don't know why so many women think that exercising is going to affect breastfeeding. It should not affect breastfeeding. I mean, I currently work out 6 times a week. They're not like high intensity, crazy workouts, but I work out Monday through Saturday. And and I did it with my first as well. It's never affected my breast milk or breastfeeding. I would just say you need to avoid the super high intensity stuff, which I don't think you're going to be doing anyway. Like, I would not encourage you to try to run a marathon. I would not encourage you to try to do really intense workouts, but there's nothing wrong with strength training. You can strength train literally every day if you want to. You don't necessarily have to, but you can strength. And normally people would do 3-4 times a week. That's not going to affect your milk supply. So I wouldn't worry about that. Julie also asks how to track your cycle postpartum while also breastfeeding. Yeah, you can't really. So remember, everybody, that your period only comes after you have ovulated. So you know how women say, I got pregnant while I was breastfeeding, I got pregnant without having a period. I got pregnant before my cycle came back. They got pregnant on their very first ovulation before their first period could kick in. And if you want to track your ovulation, you can track your cervical mucus pretty regularly to see if you're getting that egg white consistency, to see if you're ovulating. But I am not so well versed in ovulation during postpartum and breastfeeding. So I would encourage you to go to somebody else for that, because I know a lot more about tracking your cycle when you're not postpartum. Because I don't know, I would assume that your body gives off those same signs and the same biomarkers whenever you're breastfeeding, if you're going to ovulate, but I don't know for sure. So let's go to Roxanne Gorham says, I'm insulin resistant. How would you tackle this to reverse it? If you are insulin resistant, the number one thing to do is intermittent fasting. I'm not usually someone who recommends intermittent fasting. If you just want to lose weight and feel good, I don't recommend intermittent fasting. If you're someone who's trying to get pregnant or you're postpartum, don't recommend fasting. If you have insulin resistance, which is always tied with PCOS is insulin resistance. So if you're a woman who struggles with PCOS, do intermittent fasting. I recommend fasting when it has a medical benefit for you. When you have some sort of disorder like insulin resistance that needs treatment, intermittent fasting, that's like the first thing to do. 18-6, fast for 18 hours, eat within a 6-hour window. No, sorry, 16-8. I got those mixed up. Mommy brain. Fast for 16 hours and eat within an 8-hour window. So eat from for example, 10 to 6. I almost forgot how to do math. Eat from 10 to 6, something like that. That's what I recommend. Okay. Janice Lucis says, wife is halfway through pregnancy term. What is the main thing she should focus on? Nutrition. Just eat really well, because the way that you eat during your pregnancy has everything to do with how your child turns out health-wise. Get a lot of sunshine, walk every day, eat really well, and get sunshine. If you can, strength train. If you have the energy to work out a little bit, do that too. But it's most important that you're walking every day while you're pregnant. Walk until the very end. And that's also going to help induce labor too. Okay, let's see here. David Wynn says, as a Gen Z man, I'm worried about the political divide between genders. How can men help reverse this? That's such a thoughtful question from a young man. And I'm worried about it too, David. I do get worried about the political divide between genders. So how can men help reverse this? I think that, okay, since he's asking about men, I could answer how women could help it too, but we're going to answer his question. I think what men can do is just be normal and kind in real life. I think that the best thing that men can do is to get offline and stop living chronically. I'm not saying that you live chronically online, David. I'm just saying that I think men need to stop being online chronically and just interact with women normally, because when you just show women that you're normal and you're kind and you're masculine and you care about people's well-being and you want to be a husband and a father one day, that in and of itself is going to give women hope that, oh my gosh, there are good guys out there. There are guys out there who are totally normal and who don't think that women hit the wall at 30 and are totally worthless. I think just go into your everyday life and just be a kind, generous, smart, masculine man. That's the best thing I would recommend. Get offline, get involved with your community, go do things, be a normal human being in life. And that's also going to help inspire your friends to be better. It's going to help you find a wife if you haven't already. Just get offline for a while and just go be a nice man in the real world, because I think women need to experience that, because I think far too many women are black-pilled on what kind of guys are out there. And this goes for both men and women, to be hot, work out, and take care of yourselves. You'd be surprised at how long that can go, how far that can go. It goes a long, long way to be hot. And I think it would honestly, that's one of the things, it sounds weird, but I honestly think one of the reasons why so many young people are unhappy is because a lot of people are ugly. Like nobody wants to be around or date ugly people. I mean, both outwardly and inwardly, but like, I feel like the trend lately with fashion is to like dress ugly. Don't do that. Don't make yourself ugly. Make yourself hot. Here's a good question. That new gen, what made you grow closer to orthodoxy over Protestantism? Was your husband on board? And then there's a follow-up question about orthodoxy from somebody else. I grew closer to orthodoxy because it is the one true church. It is the ancient faith. It is the church that Christ founded. It has preserved apostolic succession. And what initially made me grow closer was understanding history. I grew up in a Protestant megachurch. You guys ever heard of Rick Warren from California? Like I went to that kind of church in Georgia. It was in Savannah, Georgia. The church that I grew up in is now this like an even bigger megachurch in Savannah that has gone totally woke, of course. But I grew up in that kind of environment, and I always felt like something was a little off, and it has a very low retention rate, these kinds of churches. I mean, Protestantism has a lower retention rate than Catholicism and Orthodoxy in general, but amongst Protestant churches, the mega churches have like the lowest retention rate. So of course, I went to college and I left any semblance of faith behind, considered myself an agnostic atheist in graduate school. In my late 20s, mid to late 20s, I really felt pulled back to Christ in a way, but I wasn't going to church. And then when we moved to Tennessee, started going to church again, but it was at a Protestant non-denominational church. And I grew a lot closer to orthodoxy because I learned a lot of the history of the Protestant split from Catholicism. I learned who Martin Luther really was. And I learned a lot more about Catholicism because when we were living in the DC, Virginia area, we were going to a Catholic church kind of regularly. I was going to a Catholic Bible study because I was interested in the tradition of Catholicism. But there were a lot of things theologically that's always felt a little bit off to me about Catholicism, and Orthodoxy answered all of those things for me. And through my prayer life, I really grew closer to Orthodoxy. The thing that I loved about Orthodoxy was that they framed the church as a place to come and find healing rather than judgment. So Orthodox always say that the church is more of a hospital than a courtroom, and it's really about healing. And I love the Orthodox perspective on really acknowledging the humility of what it means to be a sinner, and that we are all very broken and must come to Christ because he is the only truly healed one, the only one who can heal our ailments and our sicknesses, spiritual and physical. And I just loved the tradition of Orthodoxy. I loved the liturgical calendar. I loved the veneration of the saints. I loved to learn about the saints. I felt so much less alone when I prayed to saints. And we had a really tough time when we first started inquiring into Orthodoxy. And I'll try not to get emotional, but I miscarried my twins in the beginning of 2023. And it was when we were becoming more serious about Orthodoxy. And I was really angry with God because I felt like, I felt like I was being punished for many of the things I did in my 20s and past years of my life. I felt like I was being punished. And I just had it in my head that Orthodoxy meant suffering. And I was convinced for a long time that in order to be Orthodox, you just had to suffer and terrible things had to happen to you. But it's one of those things where you look back on it and it's like, I understand a lot about why God allowed us to go through that during our time when we were inquiring into Orthodoxy, because it really, really strengthened our faith, and it really strengthened my prayer life, and it brought us closer to a lot of Orthodox families, and it brought us closer to the church. And we were chrismated not long ago. We were just chrismated in January of this year. So we spent a year inquiring, a little over a year. So we started inquiring into Orthodoxy in November of 2022, and then we were chrismated in January of this year. And I fell in love with so much of Orthodoxy, especially the richness of the history of the church. And I really felt like I came home. I really felt like I came home in a way that I didn't feel in the Catholic Church. And when I really got into the theology between the West and the East, so Orthodoxy is known as ancient Christianity of the East, and Catholicism is known as ancient Christianity of the West. And when you really understand the differences between the two, between the Latin tradition and then the Greek tradition, everything started to make sense to me, even down to things like Immaculate Conception. That is a concept that is actually quite heretical compared to what the Orthodox believe. Like things like transubstantiation, the Catholics, I don't mean to sound crass, but the Catholics' obsession with explaining everything and like this huge attachment to putting logic and reason sometimes above everything else, sometimes above the spiritual splendor that God has given us. And then I learned a lot about Eastern Christian theology and how there is a lot of mysticism in it. And we have to really understand that there are going to be things about what Christ has given us that we can never fully explain, we can never fully articulate. And that's okay. And that's something that I found a lot of peace in. And I didn't really like this sort of unsettled, like we must explain everything that comes out of Western Christianity. And that's how you end up with things like transubstantiation and Immaculate Conception and original sin. Like that's how you end up with all of these things that don't really come from the true church, because they're constantly trying to explain things logically and practically. Not to say that logic and reason have no place in Orthodoxy. They do have a place, but the thing that's much more important is God's sovereignty and understanding that there's a lot of mysteries that we're never going to be able to fully understand. Second question about Orthodoxy, Rachel asks, did you go to coffee hour after Divine Liturgy when you were exploring Orthodoxy? I'm nervous. Rachel, go to coffee hour. We went to coffee hour after every single liturgy from day one. And it was one of the main reasons that we became so involved in church life. That's where we met my daughter's godparents, not grandparents. That's where we met a lot of the other families that have kids similar ages. You got to go to coffee hour. It really is a beautiful time that is perfectly situated after liturgy. We break bread together. We have Eucharist, and then you go to coffee hour, and that's where you really get to connect with people. It's okay to be nervous. I was nervous too, but if your parish is anything like mine, people will come to you and they'll make you feel welcome. So I highly, highly encourage you, go to coffee hour. It's a very important part of the Orthodox experience, and it's going to help you meet people, and you can meet people that you can ask questions to, and make some good friends. Gosh, there are so many more questions that we don't have time to, so we're going to have to get to these in the next episode. I'm so sorry. Okay, this is a fun one. Nick Shell asks, do you still... it disappeared. Hold on. Let me go here. Oh my gosh, it disappeared. It's about Nick Fuentes, so of course it disappeared. Hold on. Okay, we're going to do this again. We're going to reload. Do you still talk to Nick Fuentes? What do you think about his beef with Jordan Peterson? I don't talk to Nick. I haven't spoken to him. Not we're on bad terms or anything. I just don't talk to him much. And I know he's a busy young man. The last time I saw Nick was when he was on my podcast I used to have with my friend Mike. This was probably in 2022. Yeah, 2022, I think, is the last time I saw him. And I think that was also the day where we went to our friend Bryson's birthday party. We have a mutual friend who lives in the Tennessee area, and we both went to his party that day. That was the last time I saw him. I don't talk to him much. I'm supportive of Nick. I really like seeing how much more popular he's gotten and how he's being more accepted by some mainstream circles. Many still reject him. But I think it's great that more people are aware of him now. I watch his show sometimes. Anytime I put on his show, I always enjoy it. I don't watch much content these days, but I do try to catch the replay of his show here and there. I still, to this day, genuinely think he's one of the funniest people on the internet. I don't know how you can't find Nick Fuentes funny. I've thought he's funny for years. But yeah, he was on my show with Mike twice in 2022. And when I first met him, he had just recently filmed something with The Blaze and had kind of gotten into that viral interaction with Sydney Watson, I believe. Yeah, Sydney Watson. And it was just one of those things where, half people were like, oh, Sydney got owned. And other half people were like, oh, Nick got owned. So when he came on to my podcast, he was recommended by my friend Bryson, and he didn't really know anything about me or my friend Mike. And I could tell that he was a little bit like, there was some hesitation because he had just gone on a podcast with a woman who was like, she was not very kind to him. And I think he was kind of expecting me to be a little rude to him. But we ended up really loving that episode with him. I've learned a lot from Nick over the years about geopolitics and stuff. I think he's very bright. And I think a lot of people just see snippets that they see online of him, and then they make these grand assumptions. I always tell people ask me, they're like, what do you know about Nick Fuentes? How should I think about him? And I always tell them, just go watch his show. Go watch his show. It's free. I think he films every night. I don't know, most nights. Just go watch his show and figure it out for yourself, because he streams for like 3 or 4 hours straight and talks about a lot of different things. And that's how you can get an accurate idea of what he thinks and what he believes. So anyway, what do I think about his beef with Jordan Peterson? I think it's hilarious. I send whatever he says to Jordan, I send to all my friends, and we laugh, because I do think that it's very strange. Strange is not the right word, but we'll just use that word for now. Jordan Peterson is more than willing to sit down and have a, quote, civil conversation with Destiny, who has gone on a rampage about celebrating the guy who died at Trump's rally, who got shot and died. Jordan Peterson is more than happy to have a civil conversation with him, but he won't ever sit down with somebody like Nick Fuentes because they disagree on something as big as Israel. And so, yeah, I totally understand why Nick is going to have beef with him. And I find it to be pretty entertaining, to be honest. Anytime Nick has beef with somebody online, I find it to be entertaining because they just lose their minds over Nick Fuentes. He will always be Fic Nuentes to me. And if you know, you know. He'll always be Fic. And I'll always see him as a kid because he was so young when he came on the scene. He's still young, but he's a young man now, but I'll always see him as a kid. Okay, I think that's all we have time for today, guys, because it's a long enough episode. I think my son is still miraculously sleeping. So thank you for joining. Don't forget to like and subscribe to my channel. I'm sure after saying nice things about Nick, I'm going to get a lot of haters in the comments, and that's okay. I understand. If you hate him, that's fine. I'm just telling you from my personal experience what I have encountered with him, and he's not the devil. I'll just say that from my experience. I'm sure we're going to have a lot of haters in the comment section. I'm sure you're going to come after me now. It's okay. It won't be the first time. Thank you all for joining. And if there are any other topics you want to hear about, let me know in the comment section. Okay. Have a good one, guys. Thank you. Bye.